Hey guys, welcome to another daily devotion from Devotable. Today is episode 223 of the Daily Devotion Podcast from Devotable. Today's devotion is titled, From Bad to Worse, and was contributed by Hadassah True. Exodus chapter 5, verse 7 says, You are no longer to supply the people with straw for making bricks. Let them go and gather their own straw. Have you experienced the situation when things go from bad to worse? You expect good, and instead, the situation gets worse. Exodus teaches us some lessons about this situation. It feels like a punch to the stomach, leaving you breathless and shocked. Maybe you struggle with such a situation at this very moment. Maybe you are hoping for healing only to receive another frightening diagnosis. Or you are praying for a problematic job situation only to learn that you are fired. Or you invested yourself in a relationship only to receive another blow of betrayal. When things go from bad to worse, or bricks without straw. Life is full of endless possibilities for things to go from bad to worse. How can we stay hopeful when things get worse? Under the increasing pressure of adversity, we start doubting God's goodness and faithfulness. Fear, discouragement, and hopelessness start to creep in. How can we continue to trust God and His promises? The Jews living in Egypt under Pharaoh also experienced such a situation when things went from bad to worse. They were suffering for many years under Egyptian oppression as slaves. Then God heard their cries and called Moses to partner with God and tell the Pharaoh to let the Jews go. Hope was birthed. People expected deliverance and change in their situation. However, the mission to get the Jews free didn't develop according to the expectations. Enraged, Pharaoh said no, and on top of this, he ordered that the people make the same amount of bricks without providing the straw for them. He doubled the workload. Instead of better, it became worse. The people complained to Moses, and Moses took it to God. God's response when things go from bad to worse. In chapter 6 of the book of Exodus, God speaks to Moses and gives him several truths to lean on and stay hopeful. We can apply the same truths to our situations to strengthen our faith and remain hopeful and steady. Now you will see what I will do to Pharaoh. Exodus chapter 6, verse 1. In other words, God is just beginning. He is just beginning to work out His deliverance and His purposes. We will see and experience His redemptive and transformative work. I am the Lord. I am who I am. Exodus chapter 6, verse 2. God is the great I am, the everlasting God, the one who sees the things from the beginning to the end, and who lives eternally. Trusting Him and adopting an eternity perspective will help us stay firm. I will redeem you. Exodus chapter 6, verses 6 through 8. Because the Lord is who He is, His promises and intentions remain stable and reliable. We can remain assured in His promises to help us, set us free, and redeem us from any form of oppression and slavery. More of God's wonder and grace. The narrative in Exodus gives us one more hopeful perspective when things go from bad to worse. God tells Moses that He will harden Pharaoh's heart, but He will also multiply His signs and wonders in Egypt. Exodus chapter 7, verse 3. Often, the outcome of the temporary hardening of a situation or a person's heart is the multiplication of God's miracles and mighty deeds. The hardening is also the perfect condition for us to test our hearts and strengthen our faith. Learn to endure and persevere. Learn to trust no matter what. Friends, who is your Pharaoh? Who is your tormentor? Who is your oppressor? Is that fear an unfair boss? Illness, weakness, jealousy, unforgiveness, or bitterness? Take heart and choose once again to place your hope in the great I Am. Remember that you plus Jesus can do everything, can endure anything, can overcome everything. Prayer. Lord, I ask you to be on my mouth and to put feet on my faith. Help me to stay hopeful and wait for you when I'm supposed to make bricks without straw, and my situation seems to go from bad to worse. Change my perspective so I can trust you and see my difficult circumstances as the perfect scene for you to multiply your miracles and your grace. Amen. Guys, I love this devotion because it points out a particular part of a story that a lot of us may have heard but have glanced over because it didn't seem like it was that important of a detail. I know that's kind of where I am. So let's paint the picture of this story. We know that the Israelites were enslaved by the Egyptians. We know that Moses was sent to be their deliverer. God sent him with a message to Pharaoh to let the Israelites go. So imagine you're an Israelite under the ruling fist of Pharaoh and the Egyptian nation, and you're toiling away in hot weather, working from sunup to sundown, making bricks and doing who knows what else as a slave to the Egyptian empire. And then all of a sudden you see Moses comes into the scene, and he's supposed to be your deliverer, your savior. He's supposed to be the one that takes you out of this bondage and leads you to the promised land. And you get that in your mind. You're anticipating that's what's going to happen. And as Moses comes in, we all know the story, tells Pharaoh that he needs to let his people go. He needs to let the Israelites go. And Pharaoh's heart is hardened to that message. Of course, he's not just going to let his slaves go. Who knows what kind of impact that would have to his empire. And instead of that happening and the Israelites getting to leave their captor, Pharaoh's heart is hardened, and he makes it that much harder for them to do what they had already been doing. He tells them that they're no longer allowed to be given straw to make the bricks for. Now they're going to have to go out and gather straw. Now they're going to have to go out and do one more thing for themselves that was given to them but is now taken away. And I know a lot of people can resonate with that situation because there are times in our lives where things are hard. And I know that I've experienced it, and you guys have experienced it as well. Things are tough in our lives sometimes, and we get to that point where we think, man, how can this even get any harder? How can this situation be any worse? And then all of a sudden, we get a phone call, or we get news, or the situation actually does get worse, and it's such a blow to us that sometimes we don't even know what to do. Like, we're just taken back, and we don't understand how this has even happened, or how we're to the point where we are in this situation. Maybe that's you lose someone in your family or a friend. Somebody dies, and then another week goes by and somebody else dies. And a bad situation goes to an even worse situation, and now you've got multiple people that you love and care for that have been taken away from you. Or maybe it's a trial in your life that goes from bad to worse. Or maybe a situation in school where you're just really struggling with school and you're like, how can this even get any worse? I'm so far behind and my grades are slipping. So much stuff is happening, and then something else gets piled onto you. I know we've all been there before. What is the spiritual application of that situation? I think this lesson helps us better understand how we can relate and react to those situations when they go from bad to worse. How did the Israelites react, and how did Moses react, and more importantly, how does God use that situation to both empower us and glorify Him? So this story tells exactly that. It shows us how God's power is magnified even greater whenever those situations that go from bad to worse, and then we see God work in that situation, and His grace is extended even more to us, and His power is shown even more than we can ever imagine in those situations. That's how God can use a situation that goes from bad to worse to His glory. I love the line in here that Hadassah says. She says, often the outcome of the temporary hardening of a situation or a person's heart, as in Pharaoh's heart, is the multiplication of God's miracles and mighty deeds. Guys, when we see these situations go from bad to worse, that just multiplies the power that we can see and we can show to others when God shows up in those situations. And the hardening is also a perfect time for us to test our faith. Our faith is tested whenever we are tested. Our true colors shine whenever our situations are tested. And how we react to those situations is how we learn to endure and persevere and strengthen our faith in God. And that's how we learn to trust God no matter what. I think of the story of Job. His situation certainly goes from terrible to absolutely worse as he's getting news of his family and his livestock and his possessions and everything being decimated. His situation goes from something that's unbelievable to way, way worse. And he goes through a period of self-reflection and agonizing over that situation, and then God uses that situation and that trial to bless him even more than what he had. Now, that's not to say that we're always going to get monetary blessings from God just because we endure a situation. That's a health and wealth gospel, and that is not theologically or biblically sound in any way, shape, or form. But God does use those things to strengthen our faith and strengthen our endurance, and God uses those situations so that He can predominantly get the glory out of those situations and be magnified and lifted up even more because of what He does and His power. And so I think of the relevant situation right now as we are struggling with coronavirus, and things in states and around the world are opening back up, and we're still seeing people that are dying from this every single day. The thought that my mind goes to is, what if this situation goes from bad as it is right now, where thousands of people a day in the US alone are dying from this? What if we open things back up and it goes from bad to worse? Like, that would be a terrible situation. How do we as Christians handle that situation? Well, I think this story applies perfectly to that situation. It's going to test our faith. It's going to test our endurance and our perseverance. But ultimately, we have to be able to rely on God's sovereignty throughout this entire situation. We're not in control. We've talked about that in other podcasts and several devotions. We've touched on that. We're fragile. We are not in control, and this situation just shows us ever so more that we're not in control. So we have to ask God to help us to strengthen our faith, to strengthen our endurance and our perseverance, to show other people how good of a God He is, how powerful of a God He is. And when we get outside of these situations and these trials, and we can turn around and look back on it and see just how much God's hands were in those situations, It brings us back to the story of Exodus. The Israelites crossing the Red Sea, God delivering them through the wilderness from the Egyptians. He can do that for us too, and He will do that for our situations. We just need to call on Him and trust that He is the same God that delivered the Egyptians and will deliver us. So guys, thank you so much for joining me for today's daily devotion. If you guys want to learn more about Hadassah, you can click on this devotion on the devotableapp.com website. Scroll all the way to the bottom. You can connect with her, learn more about her, see the social media profiles that she has listed below, follow her, and I appreciate her contribution to Devotable. Thank you guys so much for being with me today. If you liked this devotion, I would encourage you to subscribe or share or leave us some feedback. And that's how we're validated in what we're doing, that it's helping you guys grow in your daily walk with God. So if you like this devotion, please consider sharing it or subscribing to our YouTube channel or liking us on Facebook or all the other social media platforms that we have listed. Thank you so much for spending the last 15 or so minutes with me. I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I will talk to you later.